they don't really give out a record for longest sermon series out of a single book of the Bible. But if they did, this man here, his name's Martin Lloyd-Jones. He was a pastor in the UK back in the 1900s and for a long time. And he was kind of known for preaching long sermon series. But his sermon series on the book of Romans in particular lasted 12 and a half years. 366 sermons. And here's the real kicker. This was from 1955 to 1968. And he didn't finish before he retired. Like, he ended in Romans 14 instead of getting to the end of the book. I think if that were me, I think I would have sped up at the end or something just to actually accomplish it. But he didn't. So anyway, all that to say, we are back in our series on the book of John this morning. And you may be thinking, man, this series is really long. And I'm saying it's not that long. It's not. We're nowhere near 12 years yet on this. I will say, if they had a record for the most PowerPoint slides in a sermon, I might be up as a contender for that. But anyway, I could stay in John forever. It's such a great book, and I'm really glad that we're taking our time going through it. And I feel especially privileged to be up here with you this morning to talk about the story that we're going to look at today, because it's such a big picture of Jesus and who he is. And I feel like I need those big pictures right now. I don't know about you, but I feel like I need my soul needs a reset often. And this is one of those kind of stories. So I hope it's an encouragement to you this morning. We're gonna take a little break from our normal tradition of having you stand when we read the scripture, because this one's a long story. It's an entire chapter, and I'm going to kind of break it into chunks as we're going. So you can stay seated, but we're going to dive right in because we got a lot of ground to cover this morning. So this is in John chapter 9. We'll start right off in verse 1. John says, as he went along, and he being Jesus here, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I'm going to stop right there already, because there's a lot going on that we can just take in for a minute. That line right at the beginning, that Jesus saw this man. He saw him as a person. He saw his suffering. He saw his lifelong battle with this disability that he had. And it's such a contrast when you look at Jesus as he sees this man for being a person, and you look at these disciples who all they see is the problem that this man is carrying. And they're going, what's behind it? Rosemary Garland Thompson is a disability justice advocate, and she makes this observation. She says, the disabled person is often not engaged as a subject. People often don't talk to the person as a person, but instead, that person becomes the object of conversation, even when present. And that's what's happening in this story. These disciples are talking about this man. He's right there, and they're going to Jesus, okay, so how did this happen? What's going on here? And it's really easy to do that with people when we see them, whether it's a disability or whatever they are carrying with them, to just see them in terms of their condition and lose sight of the fact that they're a person. Several years ago, I officiated at a wedding in Wright Park. And if you know the park, you know that there are sometimes people living in the park. And there was a man there who was living in the park who came up to me before the ceremony and asked me if I wanted a peanut butter sandwich. I did not want one. And I was a little bit probably curt in my response. I'm quickly assessing what's going on here. I can tell that he is currently experiencing homelessness. I'm guessing that he wants to offer me this sandwich in exchange for some money, maybe. Like and I'm also in this other mode of being there for a different reason. And so I'm kind of being dismissive. I've kind of written him off and don't think there's much he has to offer me besides a squishy sandwich. And so I'm being kind of short. But as he sees me there in the park wearing a suit, he concludes that I'm a pastor and shares with me that he also is a believer. And he asks Karn and I for prayer because he had an interaction that morning with another person in the park experiencing homelessness, and he hadn't felt good about how he had interacted with this other person. And then he said this. He said, "I may be homeless, but I can still be judgmental." I was like, oh man. Wow, that it really hit home because that's exactly what I was being as I looked at this man. And so we did end up praying for him, and then he ended up praying for us. And it was this really sacred, humbling moment of just going, man, we so quickly dismiss people that the Lord sees you. He sees everyone as people made in the image of God, not just for whatever condition they may be in at a given time. But I do think it's interesting to think about this question that the disciples raised as they're looking at this man, because this is often how we think. They say, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" The assumption there is that there's a cause, and it's probably connected to something that this man did wrong. But they're voicing what is really a human response to any time we encounter suffering or evil in the world, and that's we go, why do bad things happen? Why is this? And in this case, they're assuming that there's a correlation, that this man somehow deserved his situation, or his family did, that they're being punished in some way, and that whatever he's going through. And we do that all the time, where we look at people and we go, well, they probably deserved it. They're probably to blame for their situation. But I'm curious about the question behind this is like, why is it that we want to know why so badly? Why is that we need to know the reason? And I think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, the world's so chaotic. We want to have some semblance of control, or that something makes sense, that there are reasons for things, that it's not just all random. I think that helps us lower our anxiety about things. If we can assign a reason to something, then we can start to feel a little better. But I think the other thing about that is it makes us feel a little bit better about ourselves if somebody else's situation is their own fault, right? Because then we can go, well, I'm in a little better shape than that. Or I can avoid experiencing that if I just avoid doing what they did. And so we use it to kind of protect ourselves as a way of defining why is it these things happen. And I'm so glad that Jesus, in his response to his disciples, unlinked these things, because that's not the right way to think about suffering at all. Jesus said this. He said, neither this man nor his parents sinned. I mean, of course they sinned, but they didn't do anything that caused this condition that he was experiencing. He said, this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. This idea of the works of God there. John tells us in one of the letters that he wrote later, he tells us what Jesus' work was really all about. He said, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. And think about what he's doing in this man's life right now. Jesus is equally aware that he's speaking to the disciples about this man in front of him, but he's aware that this man is listening and hearing what's going on. And think as he tells them what is not true here about his blindness, he is undoing a narrative that this man has had his entire life. Because everybody has assumed in this culture, in this context, that if he was blind from birth, something bad had happened. This family was maybe under some sort of a curse, or it took this disability and turned it into culpability, where there was more to this than just what he was suffering. Now he had to deal with guilt on top of it, or this sense of shame. And Christ is just rolling off that narrative and saying that's not true at all. And so he is undoing the devil's work, not just in terms of this man's blindness, but this whole backstory that this man has carried around his entire life. And he is not only saying that, he's saying that this blindness that everybody else sees as a reason to dismiss this guy, he said, actually, this man's body is a place where God's going to do a work and show himself in a new way. What a powerful thing that this is not just a man to be discarded, but actually the very place that feels like it is that limitation on him is exactly where God is going to do a work. And I hope you can hear that for your own life too, that Christ can work in all those places and display something about who God is in that place. That he wants to undo the devil's work of the narratives that you've carried around your whole life of shame and of feeling like you are unworthy, and to hear him say that is not true. That is not true. There's a different story at work here. And these works of God, in particular, in this man being this blind man, this goes back even further to Isaiah, hundreds of years before Jesus had predicted. As a prophet, he had predicted what was going to happen when the Lord's Messiah came. And here's what he said. He said, strengthen the feeble hands, those shaky hands, and steady the knees that give way. They're about to buckle under the weight. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. Do not fear. Your God will come. Can we all just say that one line together? Be strong. Do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with a vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. This is speaking of that moment when the Savior, the Messiah, is coming, and he says, listen to what he says will happen when that Messiah appears. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened. So this action is not just a miracle changing this one man's life. It is an indicator that Jesus is saying, look what's happening. I have arrived with salvation for the world. This is demonstration as well as a healing. And so then it moves on to Jesus actually interacting with this man himself. And he says, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. I think about that Jesus didn't need to do a trick to make this happen. He could have just spoken to this man and said, you're healed. But he doesn't. He does something very tactile. This man can't see yet, but he can feel and he can smell and he can sense things. And so Jesus does this very tactile thing of putting mud on the man's eyes, and then he tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And this word means sent. So this man went and washed and came home seeing. By the way, you can still go and see the actual pool of Siloam to this day. They've excavated a portion of it that goes back to this very time, which I think is just a good reminder that these stories in the Bible are actual places. You know, it grounds it in geography, and you think about this blind man navigating those steps to get down to the pool and what Jesus is asking of him. But there's such a sense of really a baptism happening here where he's got this literal dirt on him that he's going down in the water and washing off and coming up clean, and it's such a picture of what Christ is in the process of doing in his life. And that pool of Siloam, if you don't remember our study of John back in the fall, this all is happening at the Feast of Tabernacles, which the pool of Siloam played into, where the priests would go down on the last day of the festival and they would scoop water out of this pool and they would bring it up and they would pour it over the altar, and it would flow down like the book of Ezekiel, where the river of God flowing out from the temple, bringing salvation to the world. Jesus is making a big, big statement here of the arrival of this salvation in this man's life. So lots going on. But the bottom line is this man goes in dirty and he comes out clean and comes out able to see. And he goes back, and his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was, and others said, "No, he only just looks like him." Which, again, kind of gets to the point of people not really paying attention to this man who's been there every day begging, and they're looking at him now with entirely different eyes, and they're like, is that him or isn't it him? Because they haven't been really thinking of him as a person up to this point. But he himself insisted, "No, I am the man." "How then were your eyes open?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and he put it on my eyes, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and washed, and then I could see." And at this point, notice that he doesn't know who Jesus is. He's just the man that they call Jesus. "Where is this man?" they asked. "I don't know," he said. I think this is another piece of why Jesus had this man go and wash in the pool, because it actually allowed Jesus to sort of step out of the situation for a moment, for what is about to transpire and all the processing that's going to happen, and Jesus is letting it happen without being there to interrupt it. So there's a bit of a space here. So the neighbors, they brought to the Pharisees, these religious leaders and teachers, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day on which Jesus made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. So this is the sticking point for the Pharisees, because Jesus, somehow he seemed to always be healing on the Sabbath. It seemed like this was a point he's making here. But for them, as the law is you don't work on the Sabbath, they defined healing as work, and so this puts them in this really difficult situation. So, therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man, Jesus, is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." There's no way that he could be from God and be breaking God's law at the same time. But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. They were torn about this. They were conflicted. So then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He's a prophet." So he's moved now from Jesus being just the man they called Jesus to, as he's thinking about it more, going the nearest category that he has is that he's a prophet. Because the prophets in the Old Testament, they were often doing miracles and stuff, so that seems to fit. It seems to make sense. But the Pharisees, they still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. You know, it's easier to just say, well, maybe he only just had poor vision, wasn't really blind. And so they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you, quote unquote, say was born blind, how is it that now he can see? We know he's our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. Thanks, Mom and Dad. But his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he's of age, ask him. This whole concept that they are excluding people from the synagogue who believe Jesus is the Messiah, thinking that they are doing God's will, while they are really fighting against it. That's what's going on. So, a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Hard to argue with that. Then they asked him, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I've told you, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? You got to love this guy. I mean, he really is pretty bold in his responses here. Then they hurled insults at him, and they said, you are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of the opening of the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. Back to that old argument that the disciples were making. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And then they threw him out. One of my favorite fiction writers, Chaim Potok, said this. He said, there are times when those who fear God make themselves very unpleasant human beings. And I think that's really true, isn't it? That sometimes we think as Christians, we believe that it's God's work for us to judge others. We think that we're not really being strong Christians if we're not being bold and angry and coming on strong. The problem with that is that sometimes, like the Pharisees, we don't recognize our own blind spots. And so we're making all these big pronouncements. We're sure of ourselves, and yet we're completely off the mark with where God is. And so we have to listen to Paul saying, who are you to judge your neighbor? Because really, we don't see as well as we think we might. But what I love is what happened next, is because Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, listen to that right there, that Jesus, this man who has been ostracized, sent away from God's community, that's who Jesus goes intentionally to find. He makes it his point to seek him out and find him. In the very next chapter, Jesus is going to talk about being the good shepherd. And here he is going after the one, leaving the 99, going after him to find him and let him know that he's loved and that he's seen. Christ is pursuing you this morning. Maybe you are feeling isolated, you are feeling rejected, you are feeling alone. Christ sees you and he is pursuing you. And he has a far different agenda for you than maybe even what you've experienced in church at some time. God and his church are two separate things. And sometimes he has to step outside the community to reach us. Hopefully, we are growing in grace all the time and are learning to be a more welcoming place for his presence and seeing each other more clearly. But Christ is pursuing you regardless. So, Jesus, when he found him, he said to this man, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." What an awesome response there. And Jesus said, "You've now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking to you." And then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. He worshiped him. This is the real work that Jesus was doing in this man's life, was giving him spiritual sight more than just the physical sight. There is this trajectory happening between this man and the Pharisees that's kind of opposite directions. I kind of think of it as they're being on the same planet but different worlds here. So you have the Pharisees saying, "We know. We totally know what's true." And you have the man right at the beginning going, I don't know. I don't know who he is. I don't know how this happened. You have the Pharisees saying, "You're a sinner. You were steeped in sin at birth." You have the man asking, "Do you want to follow him too?" You have the Pharisees saying, "We know the law. We are disciples of Moses. We've got this. We're pretty solid in it." And this man says, "I have my story. It is what it is. I know what the Lord has done for me." And then you have the Pharisees saying, "How dare you tell us anything?" Like acting like we don't know something. "How dare you lecture us?" As opposed to this man saying, "Tell me, Jesus. Tell me, and then I'll believe it." And you see the Pharisees committing more and more to their blind spot, and the blind man gaining more and more sight as the story goes along. But here's the thing: the more sure we are that we see clearly, the less capacity we have to receive the sight that the Lord offers. Right? You can't receive that gift if you're pretty sure you're already seeing all there is to see. Well, after healing this man, Jesus said this. He said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and that those who see will become blind." And some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What, are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you'd not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." That sounds like a harsh interaction here with the Pharisees. But Jesus saying, I didn't just come to help the blind see, but to make the seeing blind. I think actually that's a gift. I think sometimes Christ gives us the gift of blindness. I go back, I've shared about this before here, but several years ago when I kind of hit my own wall of really a mental meltdown. And I remember going on a walk with my good friend, therapist, Bill, and we're on this walk, and I'm just shaking my head and saying to him adamantly, "I am not an anxious person." And his reaction to me was to laugh, and it startled me, because all of a sudden I'm like, wait, other people see something in me that I am so sure this is not who I am. I thought I could see myself really clearly, and then all of a sudden I had this big blind spot, and it completely undid my self-perception, and I was able to see, oh yeah, I'm full of anxiety. I just never recognized that's what it was, but it was the gift of my blindness that then, being aware of that blindness, that actually then enabled God to do something new in me there. And I think sometimes this idea that Jesus is saying here of, the sighted becoming blind, that was actually a gift to the Pharisees, that they are having to wrestle with something. They were divided. They were churned up. They don't know what to make of Jesus here, because healing a man who was born blind, that means there was never any sight there to start with. This is creation out of nothing. And I like what Joshua Chunmin Kang said. He said, talking about creation, he said, before creating a new thing, God let it go through darkness first. And that's what I think is happening here with the Pharisees. I think it happens with us as well, that it is a gift sometimes for the Lord to let us experience some blindness that maybe we didn't know was there before. Romans, this is my paraphrase of it, but it says, "For God has assigned all of us to the same tight box of our disobedience, so that he can have compassion on everyone." We've got to realize we're in that box before we can say, I need help to get out of that box. And as soon as we're in that place, there's all kinds of hope, right? As soon as we are willing to recognize that we need the Lord, he is there to help us. I don't know where you're at this morning. If you are needing to know that the Lord sees you, not based on your condition, based on the fact that you are a person. I don't know if you need to hear that the Lord can work in that very spot that you think is the greatest point of shame and the point of brokenness in your life, that he is pursuing you. Or maybe you're feeling like you're just beginning to recognize that you have some blind spots that you didn't know were there, and it's devastating. And you're needing to know that too is a point of hope. I love this story because Christ is meeting each person in a different way, bringing them still in this story to that same place of recognizing all of our need for him to be the light of the world. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you so much for the fact that you initiated this healing with this man. Wasn't because he was begging for help. It wasn't because he knew you could do anything. You just took it upon yourself to start. And I thank you that it's not attached to any particular behavior. Your grace is given freely, and it's given to all of us. And it's a matter of whether or not we can receive it. And so, Lord, I pray for more capacity to receive it. I pray for each person in here. Lord, you're doing a work. You're wanting to show your glory in greater ways in each of our lives. And so, Lord, help us to be more available to that, to welcome you in, Lord, and to say, tell me, Jesus. Tell me, show me more about myself and more of you so that I can believe and worship. It's in your name we pray. Amen.